Practical. But what is the practical outcome of the doctrine of the preceding pages? For it is by this alone that many will judge it. It may be answered most empathetically that there is nothing therein to which the most timid conservative can object. It is merely proposed that a believer in Jesus sitting down to his daily bread shall pronounce a benediction in remembrance of Christ. Certainly no one can object to such a grace before meat. But do you not see that this is in substance the blessing, thanksgiving for the bread in the church? We may say then with all boldness that the giving of thanks for the loaf in the church may and should be, for substance, the blessing for the daily meal, and the meditations in the mind of one who devoutly eats in church should be in our minds as we eat our daily food. And if to the invalid the physician has prescribed the drinking of the fruit of the vine, which still unfermented the most tempered may drink, why may he not behold on it an image of Christ's shed blood, and drink it with the same thanks and thoughts that attend the drinking in the church meal? Who shall say that it is a profanation if every meal one reminds himself of Christ and his death the same as in the church supper? Let it be noted that it is not here in any way suggested that a church meal be less honored, but only that the home meal also be made sacred. There is no wish nor willingness to degrade the church supper of the Lord, but only to lift up the daily repast to an equal sacredness, to secure that the blessed thoughts which characterize the former shall pervade the latter also. It is not proposed to level down, but only to level up. Let a true church supper continue to be a holy occasion, but let it not be the only sacred hour. Why should it not rather be considered a model meal and object lesson, setting forth the spirit in which every meal should be eaten, a rehearsal in which we learn more fully how properly to eat each weekday repast? And if it would not degrade the Sabbath did we seek to carry its spirit through the whole week, how, pray, will it make the church meal less venerable if one resolves to make every breaking of bread as solemn, to give to every repast the sacredness which marks the supper in the church? Furthermore, what harm can come from recognizing that innate authority of every true believer to pronounce a heartfelt benediction in memory of Christ's sufferings, and his return when partaking of their daily bread and wine, which is unreasonably presumed to be restricted to only certain ministers or priests, who are usually only men? Some will urge that it is impossible to make the family meal so sacred an occasion, for we often get to talking, say, of politics, of disputing, and then are aroused angry feelings which banish all religious emotion. Now it is certainly true, as the Apostle said, that a table of demons cannot be also a table of the Lord, but haply there remains one solution of the difficulty, namely, to abstain from all unkind words, and to admit to the family repast only those lovely emotions which are perfectly consistent with thoughts of Christ. The objection may still be pressed under the modified form that it is allowable and often necessary that the conversation at the daily table shall be on topics altogether non-religious. But even when the mind is engaged with secular thoughts, there may be in it a spiritual undertone. Take the emotion of gratitude for God's mercies. It is sincerely to be hoped that it does not entirely vanish from our minds with the last word of the blessing. Through the talking and laughter of the Thanksgiving dinner, may there not remain in the mind a spirit of praise to Him who has crowned the year with His goodness? Is it true that a Christian can eat their daily bread only in the purely secular spirit of heathen men and publicans? Why should not every meal be eaten not only in physical but also spiritual gladness? The reformer Melanchthon writes to a friend, "There is not a day nor night for more than 10 years that I have not meditated on the Holy Supper." Possibly some of his thoughts were only polemic, for there was then waged an exciting and even acrimonious controversy on this topic. But why should not a disciple of today be able to declare that for more than 10 years he has not sat down to a meal when in taking bread for the support of his body he has not thought of Christ, the food of his soul? Someone may suggest that the memorial eating would lose its sacredness and become an empty form if we sought to remember Christ in every meal. But this is the old argument of certain good Scotch Presbyterians against the having of the sacrament oftener than once in 3 months. Now would Christ's resurrection be celebrated more solemnly if we strove to remember it not so often as once a week, but only in an annual Easter or Passover? Should we be more devout in family prayer if we observe it but fortnightly, or in grace before meat, if it was said only once a month? Would it be better to consider the lilies only at rare intervals? May it not be in religion, as in other things, that that which is done oftenest will be done easiest? The question is, may we not have substantially the same thoughts in the daily meal that we have in the church supper? And should we not? Unless a man says that we ought not to try to remember Christ in every meal, he cannot object to the practical side of the doctrine of the foregoing pages. Is not this the carpenter, said the man of Nazareth, this young man whose family we all know, can he be the great Messiah? And so asks someone, can the daily meal be eaten in remembrance of Christ? But blessed is the disciple who is not offended at the fact that with the leaven and the mustard seed and the salt and the hen, lowly objects of everyday life, Jesus has made the homely fare on the cottage board a symbol of the loftiest divine realities. The Church Supper. The only name the New Testament gives to the sacred eating is the Jewish designation of the daily meal, namely, the breaking of bread. As the Greeks called a supper a symposium, or a drinking together, the eating being implied, so the Jews called it a breaking of bread, the drinking being understood. But when the disciples came together to break bread, we understand that it is not merely a eat together in friendship, but also to remember Christ in so doing. Therefore, a proper announcement of the church supper will be that the church will assemble for the breaking of bread in remembrance of Christ, or still better, the remembrance of Christ in breaking of bread. Let the spiritual exercise rather than the physical act be made prominent in the designation. And since no change is to be wrought by priestly manipulation in the bread and wine on the church table, since all that needs doing is to recognize that these, like the loaf and cup of the daily meal, are symbols of spiritual things, and to give thanks that they are blessed from the Creator not only for the support of the body, but for their memorial character also, it is no more necessary that a particular ecclesiastical official preside at the church meal than that such a one be brought to say grace at the home table. Nor need it be thought that only a deacon can distribute this bread and wine. Whoever can properly give thanks and pass the food at the home table can do so in the church meal. Very early in the church arose the doctrine of baptismal regeneration. It was held that one was christened, or made a Christian, was brought into the spiritual life, in baptism, and only in baptism. And then, since only those who possess the spiritual life can commune with Christ, it was declared that none but baptized persons could be admitted to the church table. In that very ancient writing, the Didache, chapter 9, we read, "But let no one eat of your Eucharist except those baptized into the name of the Lord. For concerning this the Lord hath said, Give not that which is holy to the dogs." Here is the first enunciation of a closed communion, and the reason for it is plainly stated, namely, that a person not yet baptized is not spiritually fitted for the sacred eating. For 15 centuries no other ground was pleaded for demanding baptism before the supper. Any medieval theologians would have given this reason alone for the rule, and the case is the same in 9/10 of Christendom at the present time. For any Greek, Roman, Lutheran, or Anglican authority of today will take the same position in denying the Holy Supper for the unbaptized. Evangelical Protestants, however, who have renounced the doctrine of baptismal regeneration, ought logically to renounce also the closed communion rule which flowed from that idea. But usages will long survive the doctrine which gave them rise, and so today the Presbyterian Church celebrating the sacrament would not invite to the table a new convert still awaiting baptism. And as sheep following those going before them, Baptists also have unthinkingly adopted the course of the Roman Catholics, and they also stoutly declare that baptism is an essential prerequisite to the church meal. For Roman Catholics and for High Church Protestants, holding the doctrine of baptismal regeneration, it is logical to hold to closed communion. But the Baptists have always declared that a man is christened by faith alone entirely apart from baptism, and so Baptists have no ground for withholding the supper till after baptism. It is urged that the commission puts the baptizing them before the teaching them to observe all things. But no pastor would hesitate to teach an unbaptized convert to hold family prayer nor to do any other Christian act, unless it be to eat in remembrance. And now by what exegetical sleight of hand can the all things be narrowed down to this one thing, so that though a disciple still unbaptized may be taught to join us in every other Christian exercise, he must not be welcomed to unite with us in breaking of bread in remembrance of Christ. He who accepts the Baptist principle cannot say that baptism is a prerequisite to the memorial eating as faith is to baptism. If, as the Baptists hold, regeneration is not wrought, but only symbolized in baptism, then to baptize one who is not yet regenerated is an unreasonable act, an unmeaning rite. But if one be regenerated before baptism, then he, though still unbaptized, can make a remembrance of Christ as genuine as that of his baptized brother, and it is not an unmeaning and unresponsible act for him to eat bread and drink wine to assist such remembrance. What is the object of the church supper? It is to aid us in our remembrance of Christ. But ought not our unbaptized brother also to remember the Savior? We have already noted the statement that the supper is a symbol of the soul's feeding on Christ. And now let us ask, concerning the disciple still unbaptized, whether it would be not proper for his soul also to feed on Christ. And if this be proper, who can object to the outward symbolizing of his spiritual act? Why cannot one remember Christ in the breaking of bread just as truly, as reasonably, and as profitably before baptism as after? But if it be proper for the unbaptized disciple to remember Christ, and also to assist his remembrance by a breaking of bread, why should we not invite him to unite with us in the church when we are doing the same thing? If we were sitting down to a weekday meal with a convert not yet baptized, he should say, "Lo, this bread which sustains our mortal bodies is a symbol of Christ, the bread of heaven. And now, as we eat this material food, let us think of Christ, the heavenly manna." Would it be incumbent on us to refuse to go on with the repast? But if we can unite with an unbaptized person in remembering Christ in the home meal, why may we not welcome him to remember the Lord with us at the church table? If an unbaptized person said, "Let us sit down together and think of Christ," we might be willing so to do. Should he point to a picture of the crucifix, saying, "Let us gaze at that picture on the wall, that it may help us to think of him," we might not object. If he drew from his pocket a crucifix, saying, "Let us look on this that it may assist our thoughts," even a rigid Protestant might still consent. And now if he said, to remind ourselves of Christ, the bread of heaven, let us eat a piece of material bread, and to remind us of his shed blood, let us drink of this red juice of the grape, why should we at last refuse? If we are willing to join with an unbaptized person in remembering Christ, why should we not consent to join him in any reasonable act that will assist such remembrance? What is the ordinance of Christ? It is a remembrance of him. The breaking of bread is simply a means thereto. It is the remembrance itself that is the end, the essential thing. But ecclesiastical legalists have squarely reversed the divine idea. Says one party, "We will cheerfully remember Christ with you, but we positively will not do it in the breaking of bread." The other party responds, "We care not a fig for your remembering Christ with us so long as you will not do it with the breaking of bread." Each party makes the outward act, the means, more important than the spiritual exercise which is the end. It is an ordinance of Christ that we commune with him in the breaking of bread. It is another ordinance of his that we commune with him in prayer, and still another that we commune with him in praise. Now we find nowhere in Scripture, nor in common sense, any terms of communion in the breaking of bread beyond that which be called for in the communion with Christ and our fellow disciples in prayer or the service of praise. The invitation to the memorial eating may be as wide as the welcome to join us in any other Christian exercise. Therefore, as the minister may say, we are about to engage in prayer in the name of Christ, and we urge all present to unite with us therein. Or, we are now about to sing a hymn of praise to Christ, and all who will devoutly join with us are invited to do so. So let him ask. We are now about to engage in a remembrance of Christ through the breaking of bread, and all who would find a pleasure in so doing are joyfully welcome to join us therein. Whether the unbaptized disciple be a member of the Society of Friends, rejecting all water baptism, or an accepted candidate for baptism still awaiting the rite, or some pious but misguided brother who has taken up a pseudo-baptism in the place of the New Testament ceremony, he is as capable of true remembrance of Christ as we are, and we may properly ask him to join us in such remembrance. Keeping in mind that the expressed purpose of the memorial thanksgiving, eating and drinking, is that as oft as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, ye do shew the Lord's death till he come, the practice of having a closed communion, or a mere symbolical eating, or even a real meal restricted only to a church setting, would deprive the world of one of the Church's greatest missionary testimonials. While it is needful for Christ's disciples to keep the memory of his sufferings and of his return fresh among themselves, it was never Christ's intention to deprive those in the world whom the Church comes in contact with of the uplifting testimony borne in the memorial thanksgiving, eating, and drinking. In conclusion, but, asks someone, will all the churches accept the foregoing doctrine which is so different from their present ideas? Certainly not. If those who are in the wrong on the doctrine of the real presence there were to read an essay showing them most conclusively their error, would they all at once abandon it? If those who are astray in the matter of the act of the subjects of baptism there were presented a treatise, making it plain from Scripture and history and reason how entirely they are mistaken, would they instantly and as one man change their practice? Nay, established conceptions are not so easily uprooted. Macaulay has remarked that no Catholic nation becomes Protestant, and no Protestant country becomes Catholic. So even with all the tracts and volumes written, no Baptist church becomes Presbyterian nor Presbyterian Baptist, no Episcopalian church becomes Congregational, and no Congregational church Episcopalian. We may think that we ourselves always follow pure reason, but we see plainly that our fellow men are influenced very little by arguments as compared with hereditarian prepossessions, habitual training, and personal prejudice. Therefore, though every unbiased reader declared the argument in the foregoing pages as conclusive as a demonstration of Euclid, one could not expect it to have any very great effect. Nevertheless, argument is not always entirely thrown away. Wherefore, if the reasoning in the preceding pages be indeed sound, it may give to here and there a disciple, and even to many a one, some suggestion which will return to his mind again and again, and which will serve to make for him his daily table a table of the Lord." End quote. By Norman Fox. Though the only conclusion our brother Norman could come to in 1898 was that maybe a believer here or there would find comfort in beholding Christ in the daily meal, we now, over 100 years later, have reason to be more optimistic. Today, people everywhere are more interested in their daily lifestyle, both spiritually and physically. They are seeking for practical Christianity to keep their experience fresh. The fact that the fall of man came by an unholy eating in the Garden of Eden should lead all to the realization of their need to have Christ fresh in their memories during their meals. And this very thing was the Lord's intention by commanding Israel thusly, quote, "When thou hast eaten and are full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee." End quote. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 10. Read verses 11 to 20 to see the reason why this command was given. The command was not restricted to any particular meal. It included breakfast as well as supper. What is of particular note here in connection with the foregoing study is that the Israelites were already pronouncing a benediction to the Lord in their regular meals, and thus Jesus was just introducing a closer, even more personal aspect of their divinely ordained custom. He was bringing his own intercessory life to their minds. This spiritual aspect of meals brings with it a means of temperance in eating, which may not be had elsewise. For more information on the other aspect of these matters, see Part 3 of this study, subtitled, "The I'm Being Religious About Eating Diet." The sop that was dipped. Quote, Verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, said unto him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, It is he to whom I shall give a sop, when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot. He then, having received the sop, went immediately out. John chapter 13, verses 21, 25, 26, and 30. Quote, From the sacramental supper he went out. Desire of Ages, page 655. Luke chapter 22, verses 19 to 24, places the inquiry as to who was the betrayer after the time of the institution of the memorial. The other three Gospels place the inquiry and answer at and after the memorial eating. A close examination of all the Gospels makes this clear. Most scholars agree with this, that he left right after the institution of the memorial. And as this proves to be true, then that means that it was the communion bread that was dipped into the dish and handed to Judas. This was also a part of the Passover meal. For the leader of the meal, after giving thanks, to break a loaf of bread, dip a piece into the dish, and hand it to an honored guest. Quote, Christ is still at the table on which the Paschal supper has been spread. The Desire of Ages, page 653. Though we are to understand that this is figurative, for the picture to be accurate, Christ would be reclining in leisure, leaning on one arm on a couch around the table, and the bread he would be breaking and distributing would be dipped into a dish and then eaten. How many today can separate themselves from the man-made custom of kneeling at the table where Christ is reclining, or would be able to take the bread eaten in memory of Christ, dip it into a dish, and eat it as food for the body, as did Jesus and his disciples? Yet this is precisely what he is calling his people to do. Return to the love and fellowship of the early church as seen in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. Quote, As we receive the bread and wine symbolizing Christ's broken body and spilled blood, we in imagination join in the scene of communion in the upper chamber. The Desire of Ages, page 661. Quote, The light shining from that communion service in the upper chamber makes sacred the provisions for our daily life. The family board becomes as the table of the Lord, and every meal a sacrament. The Desire of Ages, page 660. Quote, I saw jets of light shining from cities and villages, and from high places and the low places of the earth. God's word was obeyed. And as a result, there were memorials for him in every city and village. His truth was proclaimed throughout the world in a loud cry. Revelation 18. End quote. Testimonies for the Church, volume 9, page 28 and 29. Quote, The ordinance of the Lord's Supper was instituted as a memorial of the same event of which the Passover was a type. End quote. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 539. Suppers of the Lord in truth and power of the Spirit in every city and village. Ezekiel chapter 47, verse 9. Interesting reference verse here. Why is it there? Will anyone understand it? It is well said that the breaking of bread is the duty of Christ's ministers, and this is true. Who actually is a minister and where this should take place are the questions we are considering. Ministers. Quote, Having received their commission from God and having the approbation of the church, they, Christ's disciples, went forth baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and administering the ordinances of the Lord's house, often waiting upon the saints by presenting them the emblems of the broken body and spilt blood of the crucified Savior, to keep fresh in the memory of God's beloved children his sufferings and death. End quote. Early Writings, page 101. We have clearly seen that, historically and biblically, the often waiting upon the saints by presenting them the emblems was a daily occurrence. This being the case, we are left with but two choices of understanding what was really taking place, and what truly is our apostolic example. The first, and probably most common, is that those who had hands laid upon them went forth acting in a priestly capacity, performing the sacrament for others, who could not do it themselves unless an appointed one was present. This practice is done daily in the Catholic Church, except on the Sabbath, Saturday, in some places. This practice is also followed in varying degrees in most Protestant churches. The second way of looking at the matter, and actually the truth of it, is that they were going around establishing the kingdom of heaven in the homes of the new disciples, teaching them by example how to keep fresh in their memories the sacrifice and second coming of their Savior. They were establishing memorials for him in every city and village. His truth was proclaimed throughout the world. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, page 28 and 29. The feast of the congregation on Sabbath is the crown of all daily feasts. Note: the custom of abstaining from the Lord's Supper, communion, on Saturday has its origin in the practices of Egyptians and Romans long before the time of Christ, yea, even as far back as Babylon. This stems from the fact that the Sabbath, the seventh day, Saturday, is called by the Lord a feast, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 1 to 3. Those who were antagonistic to the law of God would purposely fast on Saturday. So those who brought their feast day, Sunday, into the Christian congregation also brought their practice of defiling the Sabbath by fasting and making it a burden. They will not partake of a supper of the Lord, a holy feast, on the Sabbath, as it is written. The following is from a biblical study on the ministry appearing in the Adventist Review, NAD edition, March 7, 1991, pages 14 and 15. An Inclusive Ministry by Doug Morgan. Quote, "The New Testament indeed contains a strong theological mandate for this principle of every member participation in ministry. It is a mandate so strong that it challenges us to apply the principle to the life of the church as a whole, not just to the particular aspect labeled evangelism or soul winning. Like a living body." In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul says that the Holy Spirit, into whom every member, regardless of race, social status, or gender, see Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, is baptized, grants diverse gifts to each member of the body. These gifts, ranging from prophecy, teaching, and tongue-speaking to healing, helping, and administrating, are all equally Spirit-given and equally indispensable, and all are ministry. Paul doesn't even hint that there is one order of gifts for prophets and teachers, and another order, less sacred, and thus inferior, for healing and helping. Whether we speak or render service, we are all stewards of God's grace. We are all ministers. This letter also brings out the new conception of priesthood that the gospel entails. No longer is the priesthood a special class of men endowed with sacred powers not possessed by the rest of the community. Rather, all those who come to Christ, see 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, constitute a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Verse 5, Revised Standard Version. As Dr. Fortfrid Oosterwal pointed out years ago, the distinction made between laity and clergy is foreign to the New Testament. By virtue of their baptism in principle, all members participate alike in the apostolic succession, authority in the priesthood, in the ministry, in the worship, in the mission, and in the charismata, gifts of the church. The laity is the entire people of God, and every member of the laity is also a minister. What might happen if we were to renew our focus on and commitment to the New Testament conception of ministry as shared by the entire community of the faithful? Jolted from lethargy. For one thing, it would deepen and more firmly ground congregational spiritual life. Conviction that the Holy Spirit calls, inspires, and empowers each of us to specific ministerial functions would jolt us from our lethargy and enliven us to our task. Our lives and actions would take on heightened significance, a significance based not on our abilities and achievements, but on our full share in privileges, responsibilities, and destiny of our royal priesthood. Verse 9. Every baptized Christian is a minister, and when we see ourselves as such, the work of God becomes our work, whether we are paid or unpaid for it, whether we work at it 4 hours a week or 40. We are all ministers in the great cause of making known the good news of God's kingdom of justice and peace. Prescription for chaos? At first glance, it may appear that the understanding of ministry I am advocating is impractical and would result in chaos. If all members are ministers, are none to be looked to for leadership? Are none to be educated and paid to spend most of their time fulfilling certain ministerial functions? The answer to both questions is no. Leadership is one aspect of ministry, but administrating is no more or no less ministry than is helping. Under the guidance of the Spirit, the church may decide that certain ministerial functions require particular training or should be carried out full-time by salaried individuals. But this should not create a qualitatively distinct class of ministers with a special spiritual status not shared by all other members in their capacity as ministers in their own right. When ministry is seen as something shared by everyone, it becomes more effective and less frustrating to those involved, for we are freed from the unrealistic expectation that one person in the congregation, namely the pastor, is equipped to meet the full range of ministerial needs of the congregation. A biblical people. Obviously, the concept of inclusive ministry challenges the deeply entrenched notion that there is or should be a clerical caste, and this concept implies changes in the way church life is constructed and administered. My purpose is not to detail the specific implications of the spiritual passages to which I referred, but these passages do suggest a correlation between the participation of all members in ministry and the power and authenticity of the church in its communal life and its witness to the world. If we value our commitment to being biblical people above doing things the way we've always done them, then we must allow these passages to make us flexible and open to change. The concept of inclusive ministry would give us a new perspective on the openness of this calling to all believers. The ordained gospel ministry does not constitute a special class set apart from the rest of the people of God. It does not possess sacral prerogatives and authority not shared by other members of the church. It is true that some New Testament passages do speak of bishops or presiding elders or overseers. 1 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 to 7, Titus chapter 1 verses 7 to 9, and 1 Peter chapter 5 verses 1 to 4. But there is no solid reason for viewing this leadership role as set apart from or above other ministerial roles within the holy priesthood that comprises all believers. The difference between an overseer and the other believers is not sacrally qualitative, but functional, related to the exercise of different gifts. Ordained to work. Our commitment to being God's faithful people, proclaimers of His kingdom, calls us to consider anew the apostolic vision of inclusive ministry and to order the life of our community accordingly. End quote.